Hello, this is Naoto, and in this tutorial I'd like to explain technique that I recently discovered using modulate to do another kind of feedback. And in this video I use a lot of modulate and also feedback, so if you haven't watched those videos, please check them out. I think it's in the playlist. So the goal is to make this kind of pattern, and yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Okay, let's start with blank screen, if I can. Okay, so in the past tutorials, I think I already explained, um, let's say I start with a colored shape, like this, and then I want to have feedback, so I take the O0 buffer and layer it with this. Well, nothing happens because I need to add something here, for example, maybe scaling. That makes feedback. Usually I set default size and then very small number, or you can just say 0.000 whatever, because then the edge becomes a bit clearer. So this is nice, but what I don't like in this feedback is usually you see this a bit of not jaggy, but how do you call it, like it's not really straight going diagonally. I think it's because how pixels are sampled, depending on how far it's from the center of the image, there is like a bit of an error because of the interpolation of sampling whatsoever. So I mean, that's the kind of the detailed stuff, and I don't even know what exactly is happening, but this is not clean. And I was just thinking about how to make a clean feedback. I would start with something a bit easier. Scroll X, again I set small number, maybe like this. This is okay. I just refresh it so you don't see the. Sure. Maybe I change the color a bit so you see the color propagating, and this is nice. And I'm using scroll X, it's totally fine. But if you watch the modulation video, you might think, is it possible with modulate? And it is indeed possible. If so, in modulate, you know that the red color applies to the X like shift, and Y is no, green is Y. So red, if I want to move it this way in the X direction, then I have red color in the solid. Green is 0 so that it won't affect the Y direction, and blue doesn't matter, so if you put crazy color, it doesn't really matter. What's gonna happen here? It's a bit dramatic, but if you set it like this, then you actually get the same effect as scroll X. And of course, if you have 0 and 0.1 in this direction, then it starts to move in the Y direction, which is quite interesting because now you see that the oscillator is like keep moving, and actually you see this diagonal pattern, which is actually really clean. It's nice. I want that. What if I have both X and Y? This is really interesting because this is something that actually I wanted in the beginning. It's a bit like scaling in a way because it goes like towards like to the corner. But what I don't like is it works in this area, but it doesn't work in the other, to like they won't go to the other corners. I mean, it just wraps. if you think about flipping Y, then of course pixels move to the left, bottom left corner. So we're getting closer. We need like some kind of conditional shift to each direction, and oops. Yeah, now I'm just manually changing the numbers, but I want solid, like top left, solid, top right, bottom left, bottom right, all like different colors as solid. And you can of course do it by doing like mask and shape to make the shape like a quarter of the screen size. If you do it this way, then it won't only affects in the middle of the image. I just refresh it to make it clear. And of course, if you scroll it, I think it's like 0.25, 0.25. Okay, it's not the right one. Maybe I need this one. Yeah, this is kind of thing I want. Because now the pixels are moving to the bottom, which is nice. And then I have to do another layer. I think I have to change layers to make another shape here, another shape here, another shape there. But it's not really clean way to write it, so I figured out how to do it in a very smart way, let's say. It's actually using gradient. Because gradient starts from 0, 0 here on top. Red is 0, green is 0, and here red is 1, green 0. Here's red 1, green 1, and this is red 0, green 1. So that's perfect, although it's smoothly or linearly change the color, so I actually want pixelate. Pixelate is really interesting because 2, 2 means it will divide into like quarter of the texture, and it samples in the middle of that region. So this part would look like 0.25, 0.25, and this part will be 0.75, 0.25, and so on. So this is super nice, but it's still not what I want because they're all still positive number. So I just have to adjust the value by shifting to minus 0.5. Oops, this is really not fun to watch. First of all, the value is too big. Default is 0.1 for modulate. Let's say 0.02. Nothing happens because actually this is, instead of spreading out, it's actually merging to the center. They're just like having scale. So this is almost like scale 0.99 or something. But so if I want to make it bigger, then I just have to flip it. This is great because this diagonal pattern looks really straight. It's very similar to scale. Like if you compare this to scale, if I type it correctly, maybe like it's 1.05. It's similar, but you see that actually this gap here, closer to the center, is smaller, and it becomes bigger and bigger because that's how the scale works. But if you have modulate, because of the pixelate, it uniformly shifts the pixel, and it becomes clearer if I make this value a bit bigger. So this is super interesting. You see this kind of brick kind of pattern here, and all these gaps are same gap or pitch, which I really like, which is really geometric. And yeah, I just achieved what I wanted. And also, if I rotate this oscillator, then I think you start to see more interesting patterns. Now you see that actually this brick pattern is not just in the bottom and the top, but on the sides as well. They are really interesting. And the nice thing about this is if you apply scale, it's just uniform transformation in the image, but this really gives you so much freedom. For example, if you multiply this with a shape, I use this really often. Let's say multiply. What is this? Before trying this, I will show you what this does. It's just like gradient pattern. It's not even like look like a circle. It's like a blurry circle. And what's nice about this is if you modulate with color closer to 0, then it won't do anything. So these parts are darker, so it won't affect too much, and the white part will affect a lot. Let's see what happens. So in fact, you see that, maybe I put this a little bit higher. Yeah, now you see that, and I can actually lower this value a bit. And now you clearly see that this is like a kind of fisheye kind of effect, or is it the opposite of fisheye? I don't know. But you see that the pitch here is bigger and it becomes smaller and smaller, which is actually opposite of what you saw with scale, but it's somewhat different. Of course, you can do it not as an ellipse or a circle, but if you put it 4, then it actually yeah, it becomes like a scale, but in a opposite way. So closer to the center, it has bigger pitch, and towards the edge of the screen, it becomes how to say, transformation becomes smaller and smaller, which is super interesting. Another thing is you don't have to actually use a shape, but like what happens if you do noise, for example. It looks like almost like when you do just like a modulation with noise, but it's definitely different. It has different quality to it, which I found it's interesting. And also, what's super nice about this is if you change this to add, for example, and maybe I'll just lower this effect, and this is something else. This is I think it's almost the same as taking this out and doing modulate with noise. Maybe not. I don't know. Whoa. I forgot the dot. Yeah, I think it's roughly the same, but yeah, like if you change this from multiply to add, it really changes how it affects the image, and that's really interesting thing to explore. You need to know a bit about the what's happening here. That you're just changing the red channel and green channel to affect the pixel shift, which is super confusing. But for example, if you're really lost, you can always go back to this and then just do color. If you do 0, 0, then of course nothing happens. I mean, it stopped, but it's just taking the buffer, like it's a feedback, so it's actually, if you refresh, of course nothing happens. And then if you just like say, okay, I'll increase the red channel a little bit, then you see that red channel is affecting the X direction, and the back stops with this. Now it's stretching the Y value, and then if I flip it, then okay, this is not so cool, but it's doing something. I don't know. Okay, but this is really nice way to shift pixels without using scroll X, scroll Y, or scale, and it's more flexible in terms of the spatial sense, spatial domain. That, for example, I was using like shape, but also I can do oscillator, maybe a small number. What happens is that it's actually doing the same effect as before, like scaling, but it makes kind of variation within this image. And of course, what I love is to use pixelate. Always use pixelate. And yeah, maybe it's not so clear, but yeah, now it's a bit clearer that if you do pixelate 2, I mean, the second number doesn't really matter for oscillator because y is anyways uniform. If you do pixelate 2 of oscillator, then it's just like changing color in the left side of the image and right side of the image. Of course, if you are not sure, just take it out and show it. That's what's happening. So it's just like alternating the effect in the two spaces. And like I used brightness here, I could also do it here. Oops, I think I'll here. Let's see what happens. Oops, that's not compiling. It has to be here. Okay, now it's super interesting. I mean, everything is interesting, but because now brightness is minus 0.5, so usually oscillator returns 0 to 1, and even if you pixelate it, it's still 0 to 1. And if you do brightness minus 0.5, then the range changes from 0 to 1 to minus 0.5 to 0.5. And in fact, so that this can return a negative value or positive value, and depending on the sign, it changes from scaling smaller to scaling bigger, and that's what's happening here. I can also do pixelate 1 to make it a bit clearer. So now it's just like kind of making this stretch based on the oscillation. I mean, of course, you might think that, okay, I can do that with scale with an arrow function. Something like this, and this will be probably crazy, so I have to do 1 and plus 1, something like this. Yeah, I mean, the parameters are a bit wrong, but it's something similar, let's say. But actually, how it treats the edge is very different. So in this version, you see these like small lines coming out of like when it's scaling smaller. But, oops. But in the other case, when I use modulate, I think actually it's the same. I don't know. Oh yeah, it's just because that it didn't go beyond the screen, so that's why it was. I thought it's a bit different, but yeah, actually it makes the same aliasing, or how to say, like weird lines as an effect, which is not really pleasant in either way. But anyways, what I want to say is it's very different from scale, that you can do this kind of weird effect, like so it's spatially changing the parameter of the scale coefficient or whatever. Right. This is cool. I think there are some bonus things that I want to cover, but I feel it's already quite a lot. What I might do is, okay, instead of this gradient, you can just actually use any value, I mean any function for modulate, right? I mean, we do it. Like if you do noise, of course, this, I think I already said this, something like this in the other feedback video, but what if I have something color like oscillator? Yeah, here if you have the last like third value of oscillator that shifts RGB, and I usually use like modulate hue because it treats different colors in an interesting way to modulate, but this time I just stick to modulate instead, and let's see what happens. Okay, that's not bad. Collade. I think what I should do is, now all the pixels are like going towards that way. I mean, it creates the curves, but again, brightness, like always brightness, minus 0.5, and it creates really strange patterns. Like in the beginning of this video, I think, yeah, you see this weird wavy pattern coming out. If I increase frequency, then it changes. And also, of course, if I add the scaling trick. So yeah, this is the interesting part, I would say. Set 2 and 2. Oh, now it really affects my chroma key. Okay, this was, I'll just flip it because then I get more scaling. And now you see that these wavy patterns are still present, but also the last part, the one I added, is creating a scaling effect, and it kind of propagates towards the edge. So many things you can try. And last thing, it's a bit different. I mean, it's the same trick, but what I found super interesting. I mean, okay, I'll just keep saying that. Okay, in this aspect ratio, I should just scale. Oh, I need to learn how to type. 1, 2.605. Okay. So, what do I do now? I'll just make it nicer by adding color, always next to it, in this case mask. Here. And I do the same thing, but this time without feedback. Can't believe that I live code with this awful typing. Okay, what's happening here? It's scaling, but in a... So now you see that it's actually not really scaling, but it's just like pushing pixels. It looks a bit like Collade effect, but if you actually compare with Collado effect, so usually you have Collado here. Oh, yeah, I think it's because this shape is like moved somewhere. So I don't know. So like this, yeah, it's still a bit far. Maybe 0.4. Yeah, I mean, what I want to say is in Collade, maybe even 2. Yeah, this is actually getting a bit similar, but it's always symmetrical, like even the color, not just the shape. Like this close to the edge is pinkish, close to the center is like yellow to green, but if you do modulate, it's very similar, but actually you will notice that the gradient is not symmetrical, and this can be used in a interesting way, I think. I just believe that this is really interesting, that in a sense that like maybe it's more familiar in processing or something. Like these primitive shapes, you can do it somewhat easily, But in Hydra, I think it's really rare that you have this kind of symmetrical, that it's like not exactly like, I don't know, like geometrical, but not symmetric. And these patterns are really hard to make in Hydra, and I think it's really interesting. Like you can just chain these modulations to make like weird shapes. Just rotate it, of course, so that it becomes like a 3D. Okay, I think I have to go, so see you in the next video.